Welcome back to Warriors Den, episode 107, with today's guest, UTKM Blue Belt and assistant instructor Petra Foerster. On that note, here's a little snippet of what she had to say about the Blue Belt test.
Physically, it was hard on me. Um, but I mean, I think the most important part to remember is just keep going, don't give up.
Yeah,
And usually I have my phase where I think, oh, I hate everybody in the world, and especially you.
especially me. That's what all students feel when they take the test. Before I get into this episode, here's a word from our sponsors. Thank you for listening to the Warriors Den podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions since 2013. If you like this podcast and our content, make sure you support us in the many various ways you can. The easy and free ways start with liking, subscribing, following, and leaving a positive review wherever you may be listening or watching. You can also follow us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram at Urban Tactics Krav Maga, and Twitter at Urban Tactics KM. You can also follow us on YouTube and Rumble at Urban Tactics Krav Maga. Another great way to support this podcast, as well as our other content, is to check out our blog at www.utkmblog.com. Here you can check out our weekly curriculum, our various blog posts, and general ideas about Krav Maga and self-defense. For those of you feeling generous, you can also click on the Support Us tab and send donations our way so we can continue providing the awesome content you love. And for those who would like a little more for their money, you can check out www.utkmu.com and learn Krav Maga and self-defense online as we teach it at our school. You can check out the various levels of curriculum with monthly or annual subscriptions and learn Krav Maga so that you too can walk in peace. Small disclaimer, UTKMU is meant to supplement your regular Krav Maga self-defense or martial arts training in person with qualified instructors and is not a substitute for in-person real training. And for those of you who want to look as good as I know you feel, you can always check out www.utkmshop.com, where you can check out and buy the latest UTKM merch from us. Warning, wearing UTKM merch will not turn you from a lamb to a lion. To start your transformation from lamb to lion, you must start your training journey today. Stay consistent and never give up wherever you may be. Side effects of wearing UTKM merch may be chronic bouts of kicking ass, feeling good, and learning to walk in peace. And of course, if you are in the Metro Vancouver area, come train with us in person. Sign up at www.urbantacticskm.com. I would love to help you on your journey from lamb into lion. And now, back to the episode. Okay, so Petra is my right-hand helper at UTKM for those who come and train with us in person, and she has made an amazing journey since she first started with us. You can check her out on the previous episode that she was on. I believe it's episode 85 or 86. I'll link it in the notes, and you can check out her journey in depth. She is now a UTKM Blue Belt, the first of many to come. She is a Judo Black Belt. She is a BJJ Blue Belt, and she is continuing her martial arts journey every day. Now, in this episode, you also get to see her cat, which interrupts the episode many times because, cats, pay attention to me. So, one of the reasons I had her on is because Petra asked me to come on, which is wonderful, and because she felt that she didn't really talk about socialism properly in our last episode. For those who don't know, Petra grew up in East Germany under the former USSR and grew up in a authoritarian socialistic country. And we do talk about martial arts and teaching and the world around us, but she really wants people to understand that while socialism to a limited degree has merits, right? Socialized healthcare can be good. Extreme centralized governments under socialist regimes just become authoritarian governments, regardless whether it be a fascist authoritarian government, whether it be a socialist authoritarian government. Authoritarianism under a centralized regime is bad. And so she has to come on to further expand this topic. And as always, with me, I'm meandering and we talk about a variety of topics. We starting with the Blue Belt experience and move through to the world and around us and her thoughts expanding on that topic. And just for some kicks, here's some photos of her blue belt test before we get to the episode. Krav Maga is not just a self-defense system, it is a way of life. Warriors Den is a podcast for Kravists, fighters, martial artists, warriors, politicians, and general citizens. Consider this. The society that separates scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Lucidity. Your host, Jonathan Fader, talks to guests in an open and uncensored format about their fights, their philosophies, and their lives. No topic is taboo, and the conversation may start in one place and end in another. As the quote suggests, you cannot separate the warrior from the politics and the world around them, as a true warrior must be a student in all forms of art and science.
You're listening to The Warrior's Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.
Okay, I am here with Petra Foerster, UTKM Blue Belt and assistant instructor. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am good. Still working on my setup here with the two headphones for those watching the video, waiting for some parts to come in. And Petra is joined by the guest, if you were watching the video.
Yes, this is Rambo.
The cat that as
Hello,
soon as the
world.
camera went on is like, I'm going to sit right in front of it. So I thought we would start with your recent blue belt, UTKM blue belt experience, and just tell people how that was for you.
Well, I mean, it was hard to get. I mean, I was trying to prepare myself as I did for the green belt test.
Hmm.
You were trying to make it easy for me by saying it will not be as physically demanding as the green belt test.
Well, it wasn't in some ways. It's different.
In some ways, but in other ways, it was worse.
Yeah.
And also, first we had like 5 hours planned for the test, and then at the end it was 7.
Wasn't it longer?
It
I
was
was guessing.
it was intense, and I went in blind pretty much. I mean, I had a rough idea what's going on, but um, like physically, it was hard on me. Um, but I mean, I think the most important part to remember is just keep going, don't give up.
Yeah.
And usually I have my phase where I think, oh, I hate everybody in the world, and especially you, but I didn't have
Yes.
it this time, so that was a first.
That's good.
Um, and for the writing, it was just enough time to answer all the questions, and you also, because you like those essay questions, it was just enough time to get as much information as you can on the paper.
That's good.
Um,
I think I would just
yeah,
want to clarify because every Krav Maga organization has different standards. When she means she went in blind, it's because normally you have an opportunity to help out or see tests that go on yellow, orange, green, and you'll have an idea of what it's about. But Petra being the first blue belt, because we've been at school since 2012, and she's the first person to stick it, or it's 2013 legally, but first person to stick it out long enough to get to the rank of blue belt. So she was the proverbial guinea pig. So I
yeah,
put it for 5 hours, not sure how long it's going to take. It took about 7, and which includes some written because at the higher levels you need to show understanding, not just technique, which is possibly different than a lot of other organizations who just want you to punch them in the face and show them how good you are.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as you said, every school is different, and but having to be like having to challenge yourself, having to push yourself, that's just part what it makes it appealing to me, because if you're just getting handed stuff, that's just doesn't make it worthwhile. But if you really have to work hard, and for me, it's always still interesting to see how far I can push myself, like physically, how far I can go,
Yeah.
and Yeah, because I don't consider myself an athlete. I mean, okay, I have been training martial arts for a long time, but only because I'm training, that does not mean that I'm an athlete. So but just also mentally, um, but after the blue belt test, I was just thinking, okay, I'm ready for whatever comes next.
Yeah, and I mean like that whole athlete question, it's like I'm not an athlete. I have those pictures on Instagram that people are like, "Oh my God, you're so motivated." And then what people don't know is I'm kind of lazy. And in order for me to maintain any sense of athleticism, you got to put in the work. Because I think when
Mm,
people think martial art is, they're like, "Oh my God, athletes," but it's because the average person in the 21st century is so unhealthy and like not in shape that anyone who is physical, it's like a challenge. And from people like me and you, we look up to like the competitive athletes, and we're like, we're not
yeah.
that, and they're on a whole nother level. Uh, but that does not mean you can't do it. That's the myth, that right? Obviously, you can. You've proven it multiple times. Now, because the previous year you'd done your judo black belt,
Mm.
how would you compare those processes?
Well, I mean, for judo, it was a really, really long journey for me to get my black belt. I was getting ready for my black belt test when I was still back in Germany in 2002, I think. And then I got injured, and unfortunately, I had to postpone everything. And then life happened. I moved around. So that was really a long journey for me to get my judo black belt. And the judo training in Canada is a little bit different than was for me in Germany. In Germany, my instructors really were focused on teaching us as many techniques from the Gokyo as possible. So for those who don't know, Gokyo, it means this is the basic 40 throws that you learn in judo, as at least as we were taught it back in East Germany. And for each belt, so yellow, orange, green, blue, brown, you had a set of 8 throws and then some ground techniques. So for the yellow belt test, you had to show those 8 techniques and the ground. And then for orange, you had to show 16 techniques and so on and so forth. So it it was already more thorough, I find, which
Hmm.
gave me also a little bit of an edge because I already was
The
working
German
on
way being more thermo,
the
right?
German way was more thorough,
How
I
how
find.
how unexpected.
Yeah, Germans and they're like OCD with
Yeah,
those things. Um, yeah, so that helped me a lot. And because I had been training for so long, I know we always say body memory, and they say, no, that's not body memory, it's your nervous system.
yeah.
But it was still my nervous system even after my long break when I came back and started judo again here in Canada. And I was already working on the kata back in Germany too. So this was still there, and I just had to. Yes, I trained. So the journey for the judo black belt was way, way longer, just
Mm.
because of how it happened to me. But it was not as physically demanding as the Krav Maga blue belt test or the other tests that we had,
Mentally too, I
because
would imagine.
the mental aspect is just very different.
Yeah. Show you
When
can
you yeah,
do in
when
under stress.
yeah, and when you're doing self-defense, you have a different purpose for it, right? When
Yeah.
you're doing judo as a sport, there is rules when you step on the mat, there is referees, there is some kind of safety. But self-defense is really, it's supposed to help you when push comes to shove and you really have to fight for it. And you cannot always pick and choose, or you can never pick and choose when you're being attacked by an opponent. So
Well, you can try
that's just
to avoid, but it's not always
yeah.
possible. Yeah. It's
No,
actually,
of course.
yeah. I'm writing a blog series on the Kyle Rittenhouse case about, from a just like a legal perspective,
Hmm.
from self-defense, as pure self-defense perspective, and what's it called, and a moral perspective. And it's like there are three distinct aspects to the self-defense that people don't always understand, and everyone always watches the John Wick uh movies and is like, that's self-defense. It's like, no, not really.
No. It's interesting when we have new students coming on in Krav Maga, and we have this conversation about difference between self-defense and street fight. And I find it always very interesting that people don't have that on their radar at all. It's just, I don't know. they don't
Yeah, what's your
understand that in
perception
the
like?
beginning.
Because I'm frustrated. I know it's a
Mm,
common thing. I'm frustrated with the sort of ignorance of the general public. I mean, part of it is, it's my job to teach it, but people come in with, to quote Bruce Lee, come in with an empty cup, and people come in with such full cups about what their
yeah.
expectations are. Granted, I say things people don't like. I accept that, but uh, just the basic idea that they come in with preconceived notions of what they're supposed to
Mm.
learn, and when they're not learning that, they get upset. What's your perspective on that?
Um, well, I mean, so far I was very lucky. Most of our students understand that.
Mm.
And when I have newer students come in and I talk to them and try to explain to them what is the difference, or even sometimes just people I meet or coworkers, or I just um, one day I was in mediation. It took forever, and we just talked about this and that. So sometimes when it comes up, and just just the idea to understand that when there is a street fight, it means that two people agree to fight each other, as compared to a self-defense scenario when one person does not want to fight, does not want to be attacked, and the other person with, let's say, malicious intent tries to attack for money, life, or any other thing they want to obtain from them. It's the same. I think also a lot of people who do martial arts have a very different perception of that too. So I had this conversation with one of my judo friends, and he also was talking about another self-defense school, and he was talking about that they have no honor and things like that. And then I was
What do you
also
mean by
trying to
that?
explain, well, self-defense means you have to do whatever you can to get out of that situation alive, which means you
Mm.
can kick in the groin, you can fight dirty, if you want to call it that.
Yeah,
And I tried to explain, well, it's self-defense. The one person decided to be aggressive and the other person did not agree to that.
yeah.
That's the difference to having two people agree to beat the shit out of each other.
You should just tell them. You should look at Miyamoto Musashi, the famous Japanese samurai, and a lot of other samurais thought he had no honor, yet he won. And when it's life and death, you want to win.
When it's life or death, honor my ass. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just you do whatever you can.
Yeah, I just wonder how
Um,
much of the honor
mm,
is a modern creation and how much is actually the way people were. Because I think that while the Japanese traditionally, where a lot of the traditional martial arts come from, like judo, or they're a much more honor based and socially based culture than a lot of other places. There's still, when it came to life or death, they just played by different rules in battle than people think, and I just people have these
I
like
think
glorified ideas in their heads, I think.
I think those ideas came when the samurai caste became obsolete.
Hmm.
When I think when Japan entered the modern age, let's say, and there was just there was just no, well, what do you want to call it? There was just nothing left for samurais to do because their way of life became obsolete just by the new m- modern technologies and just how the social life has changed. And
Yeah.
I think just to maybe maintain their purpose, they were now focusing on this philosophical and mental aspect of honor and studying and reading and working on yourself and try to be a better person than you were yesterday.
Mm. It's an
Um,
interesting perspective because I was just listening to something about like the state of religious identity in the U.S. and how less and less people are identifying as religious. Now, like when I was growing up, I didn't think much of religion because what I'm coming to the realization is that I don't like the explanations of a lot of religious ideologies. But then when you really dig into a lot of religions, it's about giving you a framework not to be a total piece of crap. And,
yeah,
in the absence of battle, and I might die tomorrow, and I have a family to support or honor, what keeps you in line? It's like you need to create a strict code of behavior in order to not act like a total ass. And we're seeing that in
no, and I
society, I think.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
no,
for
I
like,
agree. For me, because I grew up without religion. My parents, they were Lutherans or Protestants, whatever you want to call it,
mm,
but they kind of canceled their membership, if you want to call it that,
Yeah.
because they also didn't agree how it is being handled. My dad always said he has no issues with God and everything up there. It's the ground staff he has issues with, and
The
that's
ground staff.
pretty much
Because
sums it up.
yeah, because in Germany, like you're obligated to be a member of the religion. It's like a
No,
state thing, or no?
no, and no, you can still choose, and you can always opt out. I'm, for example, I'm not even baptized or Christianized,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, but I also was born in East Germany, and
Yeah.
under socialist guidelines, religion was bad.
No, but I mean, like, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, because it's a very different there than say here. Like, you have to pay something, and then you have to like opt out of it. How does that
Yeah.
work?
So yeah, in Germany, when you're Christianized, obviously it starts when you're being born. If you're being born to, let's say, Catholic parents, most of the time they decide that you also have to be Catholic, so which means you're being Christianized and you have to go through all those traditions and procedures and life events. And then once you're part of the working class and you're getting paid, you're automatically getting deducted a certain percentage from your wage, and that's going directly to the church, to the Catholic Church.
Hmm. Very
That
different
only
than
applies for
here.
the Catholic Church. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that you really have to, I'm not sure how that works exactly. I think you have to fill out a form. You really have to go through some procedures to say, I don't want to be a member of this institution anymore, and I want to opt out.
Yeah.
So when you're so in Germany, when you're moved from city to city, so you have to go to the town hall and you have to let them know that you have moved and your address needs to be updated. And then they also have check boxes there. Are you Lutheran? Are you Roman Catholic or others?
Yeah.
And then you have to let them know. So for me, it's always, of course,
Yes. You
others.
must let them know. Here we're like, yeah, I don't want you to know. Or you just say other and then say nothing. Now, that's just interesting. Like, has your perspective, like, we can get into the East Germany thing again. I'll just remind people that audio only, though, but last time Petra was on episode 85, I believe, and we were talking a lot about her growing up in East Germany. But now, obviously, I grew up here, you grew up there, but, and so people's perspectives change as they grow, but has your perspective changed at religion? Like, even if you're not religious, but have you, as you grow older, like have different perspectives on that at all?
Yes, when I was a child, I was, of course, religion is bad,
Mm,
and I couldn't understand how people could follow those cults or those sects. For me, it was really like that. I perceived it like that. How they could follow them, and once when I grew older, during getting more experience, becoming more mature, I understand, as you said, that's I think the origin of religion, like you, I agree, that's just a set of guidelines how to behave in a community, in a social group, to have some structure.
yeah.
Um, and I also understand that life can be pretty hard.
You think? Yeah,
And
just a tad.
whatever helps you get through the day,
Yeah,
that's just what you have to do. I mean, for me, it's martial arts. Other people find peace in the church or in any other religion.
yeah.
So it's just
Well, it's
as
funny
long
you
as
say,
people don't, yeah.
it's funny you say that because what is one of my guest I had on a little while ago, he was talking about Buddhism. And he said, one of the philosophies of Buddhism, or one of the sects of Buddhism, was, life is suffering. And I was listening to the Lex Friedman podcast recently, and he said life is suffering too. And it's like, if you accept life as suffering, a lot of people need something to help them through the day, but on sort of a more modern scientific, I don't know, approach to that. When you look into humans, without adversity, if you want to call it suffering, humans wither and die and become like meaningless blobs of flesh and electrical signals. And it's just like, when you start to understand that a little bit more, that we need purpose and we need meaning, and growth comes through adversity and be forced to change and adapt, it's like, it makes a lot more sense. But when you're just like, life is suffering, it's like, well, why would anyone want to live then? And it's just like
Yeah.
when you start learning broader, like philosophy and biology, it's like actually a lot of the basic tenets of these ideologies, they make a lot of sense, even if the explanations have been completely bastardized
Mm,
over the last 1,000 years or whatever, depending on the religion, of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
And abused for their own purposes sometimes.
Yeah, well, it's
I mean, there was a
individualistic.
reason
Yeah.
why Luther was ruffling the feathers a little bit, because he was not happy how the Catholic Church uh, treated people and how the whole institution was run back then.
Yeah, believe it or not, I don't know if they still do, but when I was going to high school, they taught that history in history class about Lutheranism. I don't remember the year. For those who don't know, Lutheranism was the first sort of westernized split from the Catholic Church. Of course, you had like the Greek Orthodox and the like Armenian Orthodox, but as far as Western separation of the Roman Catholic Church, that was one of the first major separations, and after that, it started becoming more and more common. Then you had like the Church of England under Henry VIII, because the Catholic Church wouldn't give him a divorce, and then
Yeah,
some of the
for
other,
some
yeah,
reasons.
political mostly. They didn't want to lose
Yeah.
control in England. There's lots of documentaries on that one, but it's just one of the first, like, hey, you don't have to follow the Catholic Church and you can do other stuff. I don't know. You can add on to that. My history is a little
Well, I
rusty on
mean,
that.
one of Luther's biggest accomplishments, what I find is, first of all, he was raised Catholic. He was a Catholic monk.
Yeah.
So usually when you grow up in those institutions, that's all you know. And most of the time, those people are not inclined to create any change. But he was a person who saw the flaws, and he was able to critically think and
Mm,
see that there is a lot of things going wrong. And back then, when people went to the church, to the masses, it was all in Latin,
yeah.
and the Bible was still in Latin. So what he did, he translated it into German. Of course, I'm
That's
sure there have been some
blasphemy.
mistakes, but but he wanted to make it accessible for more people. And that's the Catholic Church didn't like that either, because again, power, loss of control.
Mm,
So, and it was definitely very interesting. But Martin Luther was not the first one. There was a guy in Czech, in the kingdom of Czech. I don't know
yeah.
what the proper term is, and they started it pretty much, but the time wasn't right then, so he was executed. He was
Yeah.
burned.
I mean, that's how
Um,
history is, or life
yeah,
events. Sometimes the person we remember wasn't the first; they were just the one that got
yeah,
the momentum. It's like
yeah,
say Rosa Parks. I believe there was actually someone who sat in the front of the bus before her, but it was
yeah.
I could be getting it wrong, but it was, I believe, a pregnant unwed mother, a black girl, and the cause decided they don't want to make a fuss over that one because
Mm,
it's a bad image. But a nice old lady, that's an image we can sell to get a movement going.
yeah.
And that's um, people really need to learn this stuff, because you see the manipulation that goes on in the past, and then people pretend like you can't have that kind of manipulation now, and nobody ever really knows until you're looking back. It's like I was listening to Oliver Stone, he's a director, on Joe Rogan, talk about JFK's assassination. And like, it sounds like quote conspiratorial, but the more you dig into the past, the more you realize, yeah, it sounds like there was government people involved. It really does, based on a lot of the
Mm,
evidence. And they'd be like, "Oh, we can't prove it. We can't prove it." It's like, release the documents, and yet every president, and you just always, Trump was gonna, and then Biden blocked it, the full release again, and it's just like people don't want to look. It's happened before. It can happen again. Um, and it's I think one of the reasons you wanted to talk again, because we were talking about a little bit about socialism in the last episode, about why it's bad. Now I feel that Western Commonwealth countries, and even non-Commonwealth countries, Commonwealth being former British colonies, like Germany, for example, are very much not, they're going down a path of authoritarianism again, whether it be
mm.
socialism or fascism. It's a gray line nowadays. But what what did you feel you didn't cover last time that you wanted to sort of go into this time?
Well, I think the hardest part for people to understand is how it could end up in that situation, no matter if it was under Hitler with fascism,
Mm.
or then later with socialism in not only East Germany, there are so many different countries. And people don't understand it doesn't start that authoritarian right away.
Mm.
It's a very, very slow descent. And there is one regulation after another. And if people don't stand up and speak out against it, or at least hold their politicians accountable, then they just do whatever they can to maintain in power, to
Mm.
obtain maybe even more power. And when I talk to people about that, I have to be very, very careful, because people always think, oh no, that's not going to happen these days. We're way too modern and we know way too much. Um, but but still, it's easy for people to get carried away with their day-to-day life, and they think, oh no, that doesn't concern me and I'm okay with it. I mean, it's just I don't know how many years ago, when the internet was becoming more and more important and present, and then there was this discussion about laws, what how
Mm.
much access all those companies can have, or even the government can have, to our online presence and all, to our information. And so many people said, I don't care, I don't have anything to hide. But it's not about that. It's about maintaining your own rights, because as they say, whatever the Nazis did, it was legal at this time
Mm.
when they did it. So
Yeah.
they created the legal
Framework.
framework for themselves. And if we're not paying attention, that can happen pretty fast again.
Well, you also get like complacency. Like a lot of Canadians get mad at me, but I just think in a
Mm,
large parts of Canada, people are being complacent. They're like, it's not going to happen to me, or you're being ridiculous, or this and that. And that you see the government, just contrary to actual evidence that keeps being
mm,
proven, they're like, we want more restrictions regarding COVID or other things. And you need to do what we say. And we need to, you know, um, you're seeing in the last 3 years, real time, last week's conspiracy theorists was correct. And it's happening
mm,
at a faster and faster pace. And it's funny you mentioned the internet. It's like you find that a lot of the people who make the laws know little about the things that they're actually making laws about. I was just reading, so there was a court hearing in the US, right? So separate of Canada, regarding COVID today. And someone on my Facebook who listened to the court hearing was commenting on the fact that the judge who's making a decision, one way or the other, I'm not sure exactly the details, it just seemed to know so little about the subject matter at hand, and is relying on whose testimony sounds best, right? And
mm,
I find that's why we're having problems right now, because it doesn't matter if you have thousands of documents of peer reviewed literature if the, say, government person, so-called witness, or not so-called, they would have had to been certified, is more compelling in court, than they win contrary to the evidence. Or
mm,
I've heard in Canada, I've heard cases where the judge says, well, morally and just ethically, I have to make a decision this way, but I'm unable to due to the law. And it's like, wait, we're in common law. You can
mm,
set precedents. And in Canada, they, unlike the US where they're like, yeah, we'll set precedents, Canadian judges just are completely unwilling. So people will often say like, well, the politicians wouldn't do it if it's illegal. It'll go to court, and then it goes to the court. But if the judge is like, eh, then you're screwed, because even if, let's say, in Canada, there's been several high profile politicians who've broken multiple laws, like they've completely broken it, and it's gotten to the courts, and the in the end of the day, they're like prime ministers or cabinet. They're like, well, we don't have to do what the court says, and then nobody does anything about it. And then versus
mm.
the U.S., where if that were to happen, they would be rioting, because they seem to like to riot now.
Yeah, these days seems to be very easy for them to start those.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, and you're right. It's just so strange that um, there is evidence there, and then this already starts in a smaller circles, like depending like if the plaintiff is more likable, let's say,
Mm.
or the defendant is more likable. So depending on those things, sometimes decisions are being made contrary to evidence, and that's just baffles my mind, because that's not fair.
Yeah. Well, it's like,
Um,
you look in the US, you look at some of those hearings to do with, say, the tech companies.
mm,
Now, some of the people were like, "Oh, the Republicans don't know anything," but the reality is, you look at the questions being asked by some of the Democrat and Republican Congress or Senate, and they're like, no idea what the hell they're talking about, and the tech CEOs are like confused because the question is ridiculous. And then, as the cat's walking around for those on audio only, and then, it makes the whole process look ridiculous. And then you find out because these Congress and senators are not very good at their jobs, you find out after the fact, well, actually, those CEOs lied in front of Congress or Senate, and then nothing actually happens after the fact. And then if it were to actually go to court, they just wouldn't be up on the stand. And it's just like this
mm,
whole, and then people sit there and like, oh, it'll never happen. And you're like, but you can see it happening. There's no uh, you're seeing a lot of cases of rules for thee, not for me, of politicians in many, many countries, Western countries, that supposedly respect democracy and the rights of their people. And people just don't believe it. And then you try to tell them, like, here, I'll show you this video. They're like, I'm not going to watch that. Or here's a legal
mm.
document. No, I'm not going to read that. Or here's a peer reviewed study for you. Oh, I'm not going to read that. And then it's like I've talked to several people now who grew up in, yourself included, who grew up in, authoritarian regimes, whether they be right or left wing. I've had guests, from Venezuela, from Hungary, from Germany, right, who grew up under this, and they're all saying the same thing, that the way that the West is behaving right now, from a leadership perspective, I don't even think they're being leaders anymore. It's shocking that history is repeating itself. And then, I'll see historians who be like, "That's not true. It's not doing that." And it's like, what are you talking about?
Mm.
We're seeing ourselves run down a path of not great. And then, yeah, I was watching the show The Expanse. Have you ever watched it?
No, not yet. I'm just
Uh,
trying to get
Super,
cables here,
yeah,
not too
no
much.
worries. If you hear the rustling, it's just her moving the mic. But The Expanse it's a really good sci-fi show. If you can get past the main actor's mediocre acting, which is not great, but the rest of it's amazing. Earth basically has a two-tiered system where the most of the Earth's population lives in squalor on humanitarian aid from the government, and there's a lottery in order to get. Did he sit on a key?
No, it's just he heard something and now he's fascinated by
Yeah.
it.
There's a lottery to get into even getting work. So there's people living in poverty for their whole lives because they never hit the lottery just to get a job. And I'm like, that's what happens when everything is completely controlled by the government. And people will be like, oh, that's just
Mm.
fantasy. I'm like, no, that's how that works. you know?
Yeah, and for example, in Eastern Germany, if you complied with the whole system and the structure, and I mean, when you grow up in those systems, you're being brainwashed right from birth. You're going through all those institutions, kindergarten, preschool, school, and all those youth institutions that you have, like the pioneers, and then the Free German Youth, what they called it.
Mm,
And this is just already brainwashing people into it, and it's if this is all you know, if this is your truth and you don't know anything else, it's really hard to break out of it.
mm.
So to all those people who made that change, no matter which country, that's very, very impressive, because they saw that there needs to be a change. And I always find it a little bit, I don't know, belittling when people say that's not going to happen for whatever reason. And then you think, well, why do you think it happened to us? Why do you think it happened to other countries? It's, if you look at the average person, I mean, no matter which country, we're very similar. I mean, there is not a big difference in intelligence and skills. And it's just, I don't know. I'm, again, when people say that, it makes me very angry. It always feels like we messed up, that we ended up in those systems.
Yeah. I mean, and
And
if you're born into it, you don't really have a choice. you
yeah.
know it's funny because you know me, and some of my listeners, I'm always like crapping on left-wing ideologies, but it's more, the more I look at it, the more I realize it's their presentation of the ideologies and their solutions for the problems that I have a problem with. but they make some valid points. And on one issue, they'll be like, poverty and injustice and race, and you didn't grow up in a different race that you can't possibly understand. But I'm like, okay, that's fair. So let me tell you, or in your case, not me, obviously, I grew up here. It's like, then you don't understand what you're talking about socialism. Why are you ignoring people's experiences who grew
Mm.
up in these countries, who are telling you that the way this country is going, Canada or other countries, looks a lot like the path that created dictatorship authoritarian regimes in these other countries, and they can't like connect the logic. On one end it's like, well, if you're a black person, it's not your fault, we have to help, and but if it's somebody else, it's like, no, 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 no. It's like,
Mm.
but the logic is actually the same. Like a person who grew up in a country, it's not their fault if they were born into it, but how do they deal with it, right? That's why people fight to get out of it. People just, they just completely don't understand. Now I just
I know, and
No,
it's
go on. Yeah.
fascinating, yeah. And yeah, it's always when they see a white person, automatically they assume you have some kind of privilege.
Yeah.
But as you said, depending on the country you grew up in or were born into, it might not always be the case. So you cannot just combine or generalize just because of skin color.
Yeah.
That's never going to work.
Well, that is racism.
Yeah,
Definition of racism.
I know.
So I wonder your perspective now. You are biased because you have chosen to learn under me. Because my perspective is self-defense is not just punching and kicking, and people have such a hard time with that. But what is your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you, but also because how I was raised.
Yeah.
So my dad already was always trying to um, explain to us that we have to maintain a critical stance in many situations. We cannot just go along with everything. Of course, back in East Germany, I was very careful when you had this stance, and my dad was very lucky that he had friends in higher positions. Otherwise, he would have gone to prison several times, and I might
Mm.
not have seen him after that,
That's how it
because
always is.
once you're in that system, you might just disappear.
Yeah.
Um, and I find it's, I mean, if you come in with that approach and say you want to learn self-defense, that's fine. I totally understand that. But I think people should widen their horizon a little bit and try to keep an open mind. And maybe self-defense, I think, is the first layer. Um,
By
and
that you
then
mean
once you,
physical self-defense.
yeah, the physical self-defense, but also, this whole approach that you want to be aware of your surrounding. That also applies not only for when you're walking down the street, but also when you're reading the news. You want to be aware that what you're reading might not be everything. They might have omitted stuff.
Mm.
So just well, for me, it makes sense to say self-defense is more than just the physical self-defense, because if you're not paying attention, like in Nazi Germany, the Jews, all those people who were paying attention, even if it was just people opposing the Nazis, um, they were able to read the signs, and they were able to bring their family and themselves to safety, to live to fight another day, because at the
Mm.
end, that's what we want to do, right?
Yeah, and what
So
I
for
mean,
me, it's, yeah.
well, yeah, go on, finish your thought.
So for me, that's why it all ties in together. It's not just on a micro level; it's also on a macro level.
Mm. Yeah, and people
If that
forget,
makes
like,
sense.
before Germany like closed its borders, there were a few ships that managed to get out in time only to be rejected. Canada, it
Mm,
happened. But before that, before the extreme rejection, people forget that the immigration rules back in the old days were a lot looser. And
mm,
it was so much easier just to sort of go across and travel. Now there's lots of restrictions, a lot of them rightfully so, but it basically means like you're trapped. Like, what would certain people like in Canada do if you're not allowed to leave your country anymore legally, and you're stuck, and then no other country will accept you? It's like, what do
mm,
but sneak across the border and hope for refugee status? Like, people don't think of, again, in the southern border in the US, they're like, these people are coming here for refugee status. But like if someone from Canada does it, they're like, no.
Mm,
Even if the circumstances were to end up the same, where a person can't leave their country legally, they have to cross the border and they're a prisoner in their own country. In the old days, if you could get across that border without getting shot, you're probably good. You just walk
mm,
across and get out, unless the border is like closed, which happened in Germany and eventually Poland shortly after. I forgot the year specifically, but at that point, the only way you could get out was with violence or sneaking out. Um,
mm,
and that's when I again, my history is rusty. A lot of countries rejected it because they were all taking the appeasement approach. They were trying to appease Hitler at that point.
mm.
Um, but before that, it's like, yeah, I'm going to leave Germany, and people left, right? If you left in the early 1930s, it would have been fairly easy just to throw your stuff in a bag and go.
Yeah.
Can't do that
Yeah, I
anymore.
know. No. And what I find so disappointing too is, I mean, when you learn in your history, you learn your history. But later on, when I was digging into it a little bit more, all the other countries, no matter if it was the Britain or France or the US, they all had spies or secret agents or whatever all over Europe, and they knew about certain stuff Hitler was doing, but they wouldn't intervene.
Yeah.
They wouldn't just let him do it. Like uh, when at one point, even they were aware that he was planning on invading Poland. Nothing happened. They were informed about his plans for the concentration camps.
Hmm.
Nobody cared, and
Yeah.
that's just very disappointing.
Well, it's like they knew about the concentration camps in the war, in the middle of the war, and they had the opportunity to bomb parts of them, like the railroad lines at least.
Mm,
People said, oh, they should bomb the camps, but then they said, oh, we'll kill civilians. But then people say, oh, morally, why didn't you bomb the railroad lines going to these places, or why didn't you let Hitler know, hey, we know about this? And usually, it just comes down to our resources are better spent elsewhere. That's usually how it
mm,
went. In the case of, say, the Enigma machine, when the British cracked the Enigma machine, the German code system, they purposely allowed certain attacks to happen that they knew about because they didn't want the Germans to know they'd cracked their secret code.
yeah.
Because if they changed the cipher, the code cipher, then they have to read. It took them a long time to crack it too.
Mm.
They used what was it? That computer guy. I'm blanking right now. Cracked it.
Yeah, I know who you're meaning. I just, yeah.
Totally blanking. It'll come to me. Turing, the Turing test comes from
Yes,
that. He
yes.
created the world's first supercomputer or whatever to crack the code of the Enigma. Some people say it won the
I
war.
mean, I get all those strategic and military tactics and all those things, um, but then they shouldn't talk about morals.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that because, I have philosophical debates, aggressive debates with my wife, and she sees things in very rudimentary sometimes, but it's almost like a first principles thing is that if you break things down to it, things are very much supply and demand, resource allocation. That's all it is.
Hmm.
And despite what certain people believe, you can just print money, you can just do something out of nothing.
No.
It's like if you just look at physics, like energy is neither created or destroyed, it's transferred or conserved or whatever. You do have limited resources. And if your goal is to win a war, you do have to decide how you want to use those resources. And morality sometimes doesn't come into it. And people forget about that.
Mm,
You have limited resources. We only have the ability to do certain things. And of course, based on individual morals, personal preferences, priorities, you will allocate those resources differently. But universally, from a physics perspective, everything is just about, resource allocation. So if you take the morality out of it, like it does make sense. But to me,
mm,
when I'm looking at the world, I'm just like, okay, we can either have a globalized world where we do not tolerate these kind of immoral injustices, oppression, and that, and you intervene every single time, but it's a huge use of resources. Or we can simply say, hey, that globalized model is not working. We're going to go back to more individual countries that do their own thing. though we will be more globalized due to technology. And people seem to be having a hard balance between that, because we can sit here and say never again World War II, Holocaust. Well, how many genocides have happened since then that nobody did anything about? And then we now have an argument that we shouldn't be an intervent, or the U.S. shouldn't be. Canada hasn't been interventionist and is basically doesn't have a meaningful military anymore. Sorry, guys, it's the truth. Great soldiers, just the military is not very strong anymore. But there's a huge push to make America non-interventionist, and it's like from a moral perspective, it's like, so all those moral lessons we learn mean nothing. You can make an argument either way. It's like either you let countries
Mm,
be countries, no matter how oppressed that they are, and too bad, so sad for those people, or you decide we want to be a one global community, and we start enforcing these more seriously, these moral rules about you cannot oppress the individual. Then personally, I believe you can never have too large of a centralized power, and you need to respect the rights of the individual. You can still have a globalized world, but it needs to be based on the fundamentals of that. And there just seems to be so much confusion about what anyone wants. Because in the end of the day,
mm,
I think people are just inherently selfish and just want resource allocation. Even the people who claim to be moral, you see that during COVID. It's like, we need to do the right thing. But if you start really asking questions, it's more that I don't want to lose my business, so I'm going to do the right thing,
mm,
or I don't want to lose my job, so I can. Because when you really
mm,
press people, I found that's how most of these conversations go, right? Nothing against people who made a decision for personal medical reasons or belief, but a lot of people didn't do it for that, right? And you're
mm,
finding it's actually more to do with selfish. You say that to people, they get super offended, but it's to do with selfishly motivated resource allocations. I've put 20 years into this job. I don't want to move, and therefore I will do what I need to do to comply with whatever rules, even if they make no goddamn sense. And you're starting to see that now in British Columbia. We're starting to see gyms, for example, for those who don't know, starting to refuse to close despite mandates, much like the New Jersey case that happened many, many years ago. I believe that guy won in the end in the US courts. However, Canadian courts, I don't think, are going to be kind until it hits like
mm.
high level courts where the evidence is forced out. And then there's no evidence for the shutdowns that it was unjustified. Then people will fall back on, well, we can't have a society without following the rules and the morals of the agreed upon stuff. It's like, but if they don't make any sense and they're actually harming people, then why are you enforcing it? And then it's like
Yeah,
a whole philosophical thing about what's right and what's wrong. And do laws make sense? Do they actually for the best of everyone, or do people just think that? There's a whole lot of things you could say about that.
I know there is. Well, we were talking about that too with some friends, and we were in Metro Town in the mall, just walking around. Of course, we were wearing the mask and all those things, and disinfecting our hands. But I mean, yeah, it just is. It's hard to understand that gyms, places where you can do something actively for your physical and mental health,
Mm,
uh, are closed, while restaurants and malls, all those things are still open, up and running.
yeah.
And it's just, yeah, I mean, and it's just really, really hard to understand how that works. And there was an update for this one gym. I think they were fined again, or they
Yeah,
got a
there was
fine,
one gym in
2,500.
Kelowna that had their license removed, business license removed. They had a fine given by the police because and I was looking at some. They emailed the city councilors in that city, and the city councilor said, "We agree with you." Some of them, not all of them, but some of them said, "We
Mm,
agree with you. You should be open." They said, "We have no choice. There's nothing we can do about it because legally, the province in this case has decided unilaterally that this is the way to operate. And even if we don't agree with it, there's nothing we can do." So then they're
and
going to
that's
have
not
to take.
democracy.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that the city councilors have basically implied like after these mandates are gone, they'll probably give them our business license back. So it's like theatrics at this point. It's
Mm,
that they're doing it because that's what's supposed to happen, even though the city's saying, "Yeah, we're going to give you your license back afterwards." This is just to do with something that's legally out of our hands. The province is unilaterally enforcing stuff that a lot of cities don't want to enforce. They're not interested in it. The citizens in their cities don't want to enforce it. Outside
mm,
of the major metropolitan areas or Quebec in Canada, people don't want to enforce it. They don't care. So it's basically, you're getting unilateral decision making for the cities with no regard for everybody else.
Mm,
And then when people ask for the evidence, why are you shutting gyms down? They're like, because. Can we see the data? No. Well, don't you think we should if you're making these claims?
mm.
No. We don't need to do that. It's like, what are we, China? Where they're just like, you do what we say or else. you know?
Yeah, and I mean, it is also so divisive. There's when you watch the news or whatever is presented in the media, it's always to like create a bigger gap between people. So you have on one side those people who say, yeah, we have to do what's best and we have to follow those restrictions, and because COVID, we want to make sure it's not spreading anymore, and so on and so forth. And I get that people are concerned about their health. I totally understand that. But on the other hand, you really have to stay realistic and look at look at the data that you have from all those research and all the like Israel provided lots of information on that, lots of data, as you
Yeah, and there's still being a bunch of
already,
like vaccine Nazis in Israel, which makes no sense to me. Other than the only thing that makes sense is
yeah.
the leaked document that showed the contract they had with Pfizer that the
Hmm.
new prime minister could have just said to hell with, but he decided to keep it.
Hmm.
Basically, it makes no sense, but whatever. I'm not in there
And
anymore.
I mean, people should at least now start asking why. And I mean, we all see those inconsistencies, and people should just really ask more, why are we doing this, and why is this location open, and why is this business here is closed. And because at the end of the day, there is still people meeting in restaurants, or they can still go to churches, religious events or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's politics. For example, I was thinking about it. So martial arts clubs have basically been allowed to stay open with this current health mandate, right? So I just put a caveat. Anyone who's listening or watching internationally, even if you don't live in Canada or where we live in British Columbia, what you should be thinking about when we're talking about this, or if you want to, you don't have to, is just the processes of society and how every society works different. And how, because what doesn't change is humans and how humans behave. So the last time there was lockdowns in British Columbia and stuff, the martial arts community was very like politely aggressive uh, with the politicians. The gym community, commercial gyms, etc., were like, you just tell us what we have to do. As long as we can stay open, we'll work with you, and we're okay with shutting down health and wellness. But as more evidence comes out and the numbers are coming out and the scientific literature is coming out, people are like, the hell, this doesn't make sense. So I'm thinking this time martial arts were given the pass, but gyms weren't because the gym community was not vocal enough last time. Well, the restaurant
Mm,
community has been extremely vocal. Of course, they support whatever mandates are given, but I don't think they would accept the shutdown again. Restaurants and with these new restrictions, what happened in British Columbia right before Christmas, they said bars and clubs are closed, but if restaurants can stay open. Basically, what they were trying to do is stop New Year's Eve partying and Christmas Eve partying, but restaurants basically clearly are not going to accept another close down as long as they're allowed to operate. And you see the differences when people say, no, we don't accept that. And you keep harassing them enough. That's how you know we're not a full, like, authoritarian regime, but it's just like the amount of harassment you have to give as a group of people towards your politicians to get them to not be so ridiculous is too much, right? I was thinking about my last episode I was talking about representative democracies. I don't really think representative democracy is working that well because they don't really care about what their constituents think if they're just voting with the party. And on that side, they're not engaging with their constituents. They just sort of listen to whoever yells at them the loudest because that's in their perception who's going to get them elected next time. Um, which doesn't help, and a lot of people just vote because I always voted this way, and they don't actually right? I think that's why we're allowed to be open because a lot of people called early martial arts gyms and said, "Hey, we're still allowed to be open," and they were told no. And then next thing I know, everyone's like, "Oh, actually, we're allowed to," because it's basically the government just like, fine, whatever. Whatever makes them look bad,
yeah,
they'll enforce. But otherwise, if it's quiet and out of the public eye, it's just ridiculous.
yeah, it's very interesting. I find what with the first lockdown, what really ruffled my feathers was that people were reporting each other, and that
Yeah,
was for me a total throwback, and
yeah,
it really freaked me out. Then because again, back in East Germany, people were reporting each other to the authorities, and for whatever incentive, and people disappeared or were put in prison because a trusted friend, neighbor, or even sometimes family members were reporting them. And it's just, we shouldn't be doing that. It's,
yeah.
I mean, yes, there is reasons why you should report a person for criminal actions like child abuse or violence, domestic violence, and really like those reasons where a person is like physically harmed or their life might be in danger. But reporting a person because they have a couple people over for a birthday party, that doesn't make sense, or that's not right for me.
Hmm.
So I had a hard time with that. So
Yeah.
I don't know
Oh,
if there's still people reporting,
oh,
probably,
for
but
sure, of course. I want to
yeah,
expand on that. Just give me a second, though. Okay, so I just had to pause to do something on time specific, but so you're talking about the fact that people, what you didn't like is the people were reporting other people. Uh, and people are still doing that. We call them Karens
yeah,
and mind your own damn business, but it's like in 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 a lot of people's minds, because of their beliefs of how the virus works or how the protocol works or how society should work, they don't see a difference ethically, morally, or otherwise of me reporting someone getting punched in the face or someone walking around violating COVID restrictions. Because in their head, both could cause extreme bodily harm or death. Even though the comparison is not the same, the virus is the unknown. You can't see it. You can't feel
mm,
it unless you have it, and significantly severe results. And so for them, they feel that they're either fearful for themselves because I want to get back to normal, and you idiots are ruining it for me, which is not really the truth, but they believe it to be so. Even though you're hearing experts around the world now saying, "Hey, this is endemic. It's not a pandemic in the world." People still have it in their head that we're all gonna die,
mm,
even though experts for, like, say, Omicron all over the world are saying symptoms are mild and you shouldn't be that worried. I actually don't know if you saw, I posted on Instagram. It was in Ontario, which has just introduced really strict lockdowns again. This doctor was on like Global News or one of these CTVs or something, I forgot. And she was just like, eh, like, and like, we really don't need it, and the people aren't really that affected anymore, and then that sort of stuff, and we need to kind of stop saying that everyone coming to the hospital is COVID positive, came there because of COVID.
mm,
You're starting to see this now, and the news anchor was like, but we're having less drastic effects about COVID because everyone is vaccinated, right? And the doctor is like, well, not really, because if we compare countries that don't have high vaccination rates but have Omicron, we're not seeing the kinds of thing. And you could just see this awkward look on the newscaster's face, and I'm just like, if this had been a US news broadcast, that doctor would have been pushed to a commercial break. But because it's Canada, they're just like, you can tell the newscaster is uncomfortable because the doctor's being honest, like scientifically literate, like honest about the state of things right now. And the doctor was kind of implying we need to sort of, be careful, but get back to normal. And there's like, but kids need to get vaccinated. It's like, nah, not really. Yeah, and
mm,
then it's just like that's the truth at this point from the doctors and from anyone who isn't politically motivated. And it's just, but people, I need to remember the phenomenon, but people have this idea, once they get an idea in their head, people are very reluctant to change it. And
mm,
so it's like the logic of, hey, people who have the vaccines are getting Omicron, therefore we need more vaccines. It's like, no, because the vaccine didn't prevent transmission, but people still believe that. And then the purpose then of the vaccine becomes to reduce severe illness or death, which it does for a lot of people, but also a lot of people didn't need it for that to be the case. And that doctor also said that Only the vulnerable should really be thinking about it at this point. Um,
Yeah.
and but people just they don't think that because they've gotten an idea in their head, and then you tell them, "Hey, can you look at the evidence?" And they're like, "No, I need to do my good part." And because either they're scared because they believe medical things that are not true, that they're still going to die or they're at risk, or uh, that they need, in order for society to work, we need to do these things, or because it's your fault I can't get back to normal. Now, I would suspect that people would do it in authoritarian regimes like East Germany because they feel that it's a way to protect themselves. That if they stay in the good graces of the authorities, they won't get targeted, which I'm sure you can attest is false
That
because
is
if you piss them off.
that's definitely has a point, but it's also sometimes it's certain incentives, like for example, in East Germany, to get a nice vacation spot on the Baltic Sea,
Hmm.
you had to have connections. So, and some of those incentives or rewards for reporting another person were you got your car earlier, or you got a TV set, or other stuff that for normal people was not that easily to obtain. And for some people, it's also just trying to be important, ego.
Hmm.
So there is, and sometimes it's just they just don't like that person for
Yeah,
whatever reason.
because
So
they're
I
an
mean,
asshole.
yeah, and I mean, once you report it, once you're on the watch list and they pick you up and they put you in jail, then it's a hard time again to get out of it. And the problem also is that once one family member is on the watch list, it might also affect other family members. So if you have a child that is really smart and should go to university and maybe study physics or medicine or whatever, if there is a family member that might that is not following all the rules and regulations and is not following socialism,
Yeah,
that might end in the kid not being admitted to university, even though they would qualify and would be great, would be a great doctor or whatever.
yeah,
um, and it's just, yeah, it's just the consequences that those things have. And um, I mean, I understand that people are scared, but I mean, truth is, it sounds probably hard, but I mean, at some point, sooner or later, we're all gonna die.
yeah,
nobody, nobody is here forever, and I understand that people are scared, and health is important, and you don't want to lose family members. But I think with the first lockdown, everybody really was trying their best to comply, and then it became more and more inconsistent, and more people noticed that it doesn't really add up. And people who were following the information that came out, they were just asking questions. And it's just, I get it, that I understand the idea that you learn first is the idea that is settled in, and it's hard to root that out.
mm,
And also what I noticed is people like to work in absolutes. So it's either right or wrong, it's
mm,
black or white. And working in grayscales or in between, or um, I could have totally lived with the fact if they had told us we don't have enough information yet, but this is what we have and this is what it indicates. That's why we think, that's why we made this decision. But I also understand not everybody works that way. So some people really need to be told this is what you have to do, and there is no if or but, and yeah, no gray zone in between.
which doesn't help when the people making the decisions barely understand what they're talking about.
Yeah,
It's like, hey, scientific evidence. My constituents say something else. It's like when it suits them, they'll listen to them. When it doesn't suit them,
yeah,
they ignore them, and it's very like frustrating. Like I think I don't know what's going to happen to Canada, but I'm once again I was optimistic. Now I'm not optimistic because Canada was backing off, and now they're like quadrupling down. But I think we're going to see a major. People just refuse to admit how much politics plays into this, and because people hate talking about it. And I think what's going to start happening is the speculation in the US politics is that in 20 November 2022 they're going to have major elections for Congress and Senate, and it's going to go red Republican. And there's already been some major like Republican people who've said, you wait what happens when we're going to investigate and investigate and investigate, and you're going to see a lot of these policies get dropped, right? And they're just going to undo these policies. And since a large percentage of countries are consistently listening to, blindly so, listening to the CDC and Fauci and the head of the NIH, who have huge political clout in the scientific and community, they're not going to be so, the new government, Congress and Senate is not going to look too kindly on them. And they're going to be
Mm,
forced politically, the Democrats, even if it's still Biden, are going to be forced to change their tune. Otherwise, they're going to be in huge political trouble because people are tired of this. And, when you're in charge, you have the Congress, they basically have the Senate, the Democrats, and they basically, have, when they have the presidency, they can kind of do whatever they want. So the new Congress, and if it goes red, like everyone's thinking it, even a lot of Democrats think it's going to go red next time, things are going to change because, like in Canada, that's very clearly they just do whatever the American CDC says. So if all of a sudden they're changing because like the Congress is like, you know what, we're going to cut your funding, then things will start to change globally because CDC, despite, how arrogant they're acting right now, largely are the gold standard, at least up until recently, for this kind of stuff. So
mm.
when American politics change, it's probably going to shift globally eventually.
Well, what made me very suspicious or very careful about this whole scenario is that all the information you're provided with is supporting a certain way of how everybody should respond to it. Being a very fairly new virus that we're dealing with, and but only having information pointing in one direction, that's what I found hard to believe. And whenever there is an expert or scientist or saying, okay, we cannot really make any statements because we don't have enough information, even if it was just slightly critical, those people were silenced.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can call me a conspiracy theorist at that point, but that's also something that feels very, very familiar from back in the day when the only narrative you heard was one certain way. So this is what people were supposed to think and nothing else. And
Yeah.
everybody else was being shut down and um, pushed pushed out of the way. And I think that's something that people notice that have grown up in those authoritarian systems, because this is just it was just your day-to-day life, because they want to brainwash you into a certain opinion. And that's why I find and that's something I struggle the most with, to get only information in a certain way. And I find it hard to believe, because science is, for me, is a constructive discussion. Like, you have different opinions, different approaches, different experiments, and everybody, all those different puzzle pieces come together to create the thesis. And otherwise, I find it very delusional to think that this is how we work it out. And you're right, it's very politicized, and this is not helping. Science
No.
should be separate from politics. But I also understand, because of certain reasons and people, right now it's just so intertwined. It's hard to separate the two
Oh,
of
it's
it again.
intertwined. Like, well, as you said, people want black and white, but it's not black and white. So,
No, it's not.
the one size fit all. Again, it's hilarious. If I take the left idea, just tosses the cat, the left wing notion that humans run on a spectrum, which is probably true, but the way they're dealing with it is a bit silly. But why is that not the same for scientific truth sometimes? Or when it comes to
Hmm.
health and wellness, it's like, well, we have genetic differences. Not everyone needs the same treatment. Some people need something different. It's very clear, some people should eat one way versus another. That's why some people do really well on one diet, but not another, and other people are the opposite. It's like, what does an individual need for them to prevent problems for this virus? Well, one that was fairly consistent and just consistently comes up in scientific literature, but is kind of still being ignored, is vitamin D. I was actually just
Mm.
watching this other thing. This guy hilariously was doing this black guy, I think in Florida, was doing a news news thing, and he was going in depth about like you wouldn't think, just he's just going completely in depth scientifically about what the virus is, and that the reporters are just like, just tell us about the masks, and then he goes into more explanation about why you don't really need them for this virus.
Yeah.
And it was pretty funny, and the news crew was just like, why can't you just give us a
Mm,
simple answer? It's like, well, I need to explain it to you guys because you guys are want me to say a very specific thing, and I'm explaining to you
mm-hmm,
scientifically why it's not like that. It's not black and white. Um, right. The vulnerable is one story, which is consistently the elderly and the obese, and then going down, it's low vitamin D and air pollution are kicking in and showing that those areas, because cities with clean air and high sun exposure are having less of a problem consistently. Where you can kind of look in like Texas and Florida, where they spike is when it's so hot outside, people go on the inside, which would corroborate with the data from say the UK, which said most transmission occurs in confined space in the household because you can't stay away from that a sick person forever. If you're around them all day, every day, you're probably going to pick it up. But what was interesting about the UK study, I forgot what it's called, 100 something thousand people, which is a huge study. It was like less like, yeah, there was a slight difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated people, but you'd think if you're stuck in the house with someone who tested positive, you'd get it. But it was like, no, between 20 and like 35% of people would get it if they're exposed to someone. A lot
mm-hmm,
of people have said, I didn't get it, and I was sleeping in the same bed with someone. Why? Because everyone is different. Their health levels, vitamin D levels are different. And if we're talking about health and wellness, which is what my contention has been the entire time, which is like we need to be talking about health and wellness. How do we prevent people from getting sick? And even pre-vaccines, and
mm-hmm.
no one was talking about it, and there's still barely. I think CNN just posted obesity is a problem now after they've had multiple uh, producers removed due to criminal allegations. They've had multiple anchors fired due to a misconduct. They have new ownership that has basically said we're going to stop this nonsense. Like it's a mother, so one of the major
Mm.
shareholders of the new company Discovery that bought up the Time Warner or whoever owns CNN. And now, 2 years later, they're talking about something briefly that has been scientific evidence for 2 years now, or almost 2 years now. Is it because of the new ownership? Is it because their network has a horrible perspective? No one wants to watch them anymore. Like, either way, they were
Mm.
clearly being dishonest, whether it's just not presenting the information or hiding the information or spinning the information. It's like, why are you presenting this information now? We've known about this. I mean, because I've been talking about it for the past year. Vitamin D, be
Well, it
healthy,
was also
etc.
this whole ivermectin story
Yeah.
that blew up, and nobody now is talking about it because it's just proven that was incorrect what that they were reporting, and yeah, it's beyond frustrating. And yeah, they should be promoting more people, or they should be promoting health more, so get people out moving. But I mean, it's counterproductive to shut the gyms down.
Well, at this point, it's silly. But like, so media, because people, speaking about the gyms thing, a lot of media, the one story I read from Global News, is a Canadian website, um, was basically saying we reached out to all the gyms who and employers and people who are just ignoring the rules, and they're like the common responses were we don't trust mainstream media. We're not talking to you. You're just gonna twist our words. You're a bunch of liars. Like, and the mainstream media is like, oh, these people are all crazy. It's like, no, because you know exactly what you're gonna do is you're gonna make them look bad, and it's just they've lost faith in the media, and the media just refuses to admit it. Now, speaking
Hmm.
of media, like growing up in an authoritarian socialist country, like what was the media like there? Like, is there similarities? Is there differences compared to what we're seeing a lot now?
Well, I think I touched on that already a little bit when I said all the scientific information that you find when you look online or when you read it in the newspapers is always pointing a certain direction, and that totally reminded me of back in the socialist day, because everything was pro-socialism, and even events that happened in the past were reported or so twisted around that it made it socialism look good, or the politicians. And if you dared to report anything else, you couldn't.
Yeah.
There were people were trying to report on what really is happening. So they were like uh, they had like little illegal broadcasting stations, but they had to be super careful that they were not discovered, because once the police found out where they were, or the Secret Service, they were put into prison. And there was one, I think it was in the 60s, where there was a youth group and they were trying to print flyers and provide more information, and not just the one-sided socialist construct. And yeah, so, and these were really young kids. They were 18, 19, and some of them, they were executed for that,
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
trying to provide more information.
It's
And
like, yeah, I wonder if we get to that point in Canada. Just that's how far it would have to go for people to wake up and realize, oh shit. But by then it's too late.
well, also by then people were scared into submission,
Yeah.
because by then the state had so much control and power that, first of all, you couldn't trust anybody. And yeah, if everybody was scared to just disappear.
It's kind of
And
like
I mean,
Russia. Like if you
yeah.
in Russia, like I don't follow Russian media that much, but it's like you in like Canada or the U.S., the news agencies can say like, Trudeau's wife, this and that, and Biden's son, this and that, and then you go to Russia and you don't hear anything about Putin's family ever,
Mm,
because they know if you do, you're done, and by done, probably dead.
yeah.
Right. No, I
Well,
don't know
I
what
mean,
state Russia's in, but.
Russia is a different country. So all those people who are complaining about oppression in Canada or the US, like in most Western cultures, Western countries, um, go to Russia
Yeah.
and have a look how it works there.
Well, that's
And
actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because it's like that's actually a lot of perspective the Canadians have. They're like, you should be happy to be here. You're not in these countries.
mm,
Stop complaining about your rights and freedoms. You have many rights and freedoms. You should shut up. Don't complain about what you have. And then it's like, yeah, but if you don't say anything, it goes down that path and we end up like them. And there's a disconnect. People don't get it. Oh, I don't want
mm.
to talk about that stuff, if that makes sense.
Well, I always find it funny when people say how oppressed they are, and then they provide little videos on their Instagram or TikTok accounts using Apple phones and whatever, and they
Mm,
have freedom of speech. In many countries in Russia, you do not have that. You may have it on the paper, and if you say everything following the government or the ruling party, then you're fine. You can say whatever you want. But if you're opposing those beliefs, this is where freedom of speech ends for those people.
yeah. I always found it funny if I
And
go on Facebook, the English Russian news is RT, and then the Chinese English news is like CGTC something or whatever. And I follow them because I just want to see what the hell they're saying. And at the top in disclaimer, it says government controlled state media. And I'm just like, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation should have that designation as well, because it is
mm,
Canadian controlled. It's government controlled. And they'll say, no, 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 it's not the same thing. It's like they get all their money from the government. The government can stop any stories that they don't like. People are leaving that news organization. There was actually a recent example of a very popular, well known broadcaster from that network who said, I quit because this network has lost its mind. I don't know if you saw that. And but Facebook will not put that disclaimer above that. Now, to be fair, even though CNN is heavily linked to the Democratic Party, you still technically couldn't put that disclaimer because it is privately owned. But CBC in Canada is
mm,
completely, almost exclusively publicly funded. In fact, most media in Canada is now exclusively publicly funded by the government, whether people realize it or not. There's very few news outlets that don't receive massive funding from the government because they can't sustain themselves. So, on the same note, if we're putting these disclaimers that these news agencies are controlled by the government, to me, if all their funding's coming from the government, that's controlled by the government. In Canada, most of our media is funded by the government because they're not making any money anymore, because nobody cares
mm.
about Canadian news. So,
Well, I think also in many Western countries, because when you look at the majority of your population, we're actually very, very fortunate. I mean, we have, most of us, we have a roof over our head, we have a job, we have some money to spend, we have some luxury we participate in. Um, so that's more than most people in third world countries will ever have. And I also think that many people forget that first world countries are not the majority of the countries.
mm,
It's a few. And if you're born into those countries, you're very lucky, or if you're able to immigrate into those countries. Um, and it's sometimes I think we forget, and sometimes we're getting so comfortable in this luxury, or as I call it luxury. Some people might not consider it because they don't have uh, golden taps or a golden bath tube or golden bathtub. Sorry, but I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at it, we're very, very fortunate, and it's easy to lean back and say and to complain about certain stuff where I think that's a first world problem. But there's so many people out there who have not even the minimum of rights.
yeah.
I mean, right now, when you look in many African countries or the Middle East, there's still so many countries, or Asia, where human rights, what's that?
Yeah, and it's like, I don't I actually just want to look it up, but I was listening like a week or two ago, and it's like Ethiopia is about to have a civil war, and
Mm.
most people have no clue what's going on, right? Let
Or
me
in
just see.
Afghanistan, after the Taliban took over, I mean, women's rights were
It's
just
gone.
kind of like
Yeah.
it's gone, yeah. And I mean, for girls or women to participate in any kind of sport, they're not allowed to.
Yeah, and it's yes, yeah, Ethiopia is actually in the middle of a somewhat civil war, right? Or about to, but nobody cares about that, right? So obviously, like that's the perspective people will be like, oh, like someone I follow on because I believe he's an honest, objective, scientific person is Brett Weinstein. He's got a great podcast,
Mm.
The Dark Horse, and crap, I lost my train of thought. What was it saying? Oh, and him and his wife they're like evolutionary biologists and stuff, and they just wrote a book about, and it's kind of expanding from a scientific perspective about m- our bodies are biologically ancient, but our society and morals are modern, and they're clashing right now. They wrote a book with scientific literature. They actually admitted on their podcast they were wrong about one thing that they already had to correct in the book because some new data came out, which is great to hear. They could just
Mm.
continue what they said in the book, but they said no, we were wrong about that. But people, the media will paint it as right wing nuts who want to go back to nature. But what Brett was saying is that, let's say you grew up in a Western country with all these luxuries, and let's say society collapsed completely. Which part of me is like, I hope that happens. It won't, but it's just like, fantasy. But most of us actually won't survive that. It's just
Mm.
modern humans in Western world, if you grew up, just fundamentally lack the skills to survive where you can't just go get your resources quickly from somewhere.
Mm.
And, to tie it back to self defense, it's like, why do I need to learn self defense when I can just call the police? Right. Because that's the attitude of people who've been like civilized, air quotes. Um, I don't need to learn that. Somebody else can do it. And then it's like, well, what if you need that skill? Well, I would never need that skill. And people think it's crazy to talk about like, oh, what if a solar flare happened? And they're like, you're crazy.
Mm.
That could never happen. I don't know. Last major one was in the late 1800s. They didn't have computers back then. You know what would happen now? And they just
Yeah.
look at you like you're nuts. And I'm like, this is actually a genuine, real thing that could happen. We have no way of predicting such a thing. Like they might have, I don't know, 30 or minutes notice. I think the delay from the sun is like 7 minutes or so, the light to get here. So you probably have, if they can see solar build up, 30 minutes notice. They would have no
Yeah.
idea,
Good
right?
luck. Yeah.
And it just happens, and then poof, pops your electricity. Like last night, our TV went all weird and shut off. Luckily, I had a power surge because of the snow. The power was fluctuating, and
Mm.
that's nothing compared to what a major solar flare would do if it hit half the planet. And then if all our electronics are gone, people forget like your cars. would not work. Modern cars, old
Yeah,
carbureted cars would still work, but how many of those are still around?
yeah.
And then we'd have to
And
you
then
basically
nobody can
restart.
drive them.
Yeah, you'd have absolute chaos, and it's just like people are like, that'll never happen. And it's like, well, probably it's actually higher probability than you winning the lottery as far as like a solar flare or an earthquake happening in Vancouver, for example, which is my common example. And just, I think people don't know how to
Well,
contextualize that.
and I mean, sometimes it's not doesn't even have to be a very drastic measure. For me, for example, my moment where I had understood that I cannot rely on other people. I have to be self-reliant, independent, and cannot expect other people to live my life, fight my fights. When my dad suddenly passed away in 2003, that was a big shock,
Mm.
because it was really, really unexpected. And that was just okay. That's it. I mean, my mom is a lovely person, but she's just not that not that of a support system as my dad was to me. And it was just okay. Now it's me, and I have to make it work for myself. And police, I never have police even on my screen. I don't know. I don't really law enforcement. I had a long. It took me a very, very long time to understand that usually law enforcement is not like in Eastern Germany. When law enforcement got involved, it was always bad for you. So it wouldn't really call them, and I still have a hard time to call 911 if I had to.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's just in the back of my head. I know it's me. I cannot rely on another person.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a survival mechanism. Like I was telling, my wife, uh, I have a personality of a type, as you know, and people find it off-putting. Whereas I just did one with Seb, and he said, what did he say? You know how to elicit a response out of people, and I'm like, I'm not trying to do it, but if the people in your life don't want to be there, and even the people who are in your life, they're like, I don't want to deal with it, and they don't want to help you go good. You sort of learn, rightfully or wrongfully, how to do stuff on your own, right? And
Mm,
it's like this: if you can't trust the people around you, or you can trust you, but they can't give you what you really need to solve your problem, it's like you will ultimately be on your own. And it's like supply chain issues, for example. Let's take it off the individual level. Well, if America, and people blame the corporations, but it's the politicians too. If everyone hadn't shipped all the manufacturing out of the US, um, and shipped it off into countries, they wouldn't have the problems, the supply chains, because the globalized ideology was, well, this area of the country, of the world, can manufacture this, and that area can manufacture that, and it's totally okay. And then they realized in COVID, like, that was a terrible idea. You actually need to have a diversified global network where maybe you have five major manufacturers of a particular like type of thing, so that if one goes down, it doesn't interrupt the entire global supply chain. And so, like, on one level, you need community to build and be better and interact with society, but on the other level, you do need to be able to learn to operate at a more smaller scale, because if everything is reliant on everything else, then one thing goes wrong, everything is screwed.
mm,
Versus if it's the individual can take care of themselves within reason, and then the community can take care of itself within reason, and then the country can take, and then global, and then it doesn't have quite the disastrous effect. So yes, there's a lot of people now who can barely take care of themselves without the structures of society. It's like they're screwed if things are interrupted, like the
mm,
snow hit and my garbage isn't being picked up. And it's
yeah.
like, it's really annoying, but it's like, what would happen if no one's picking up the garbage and there's no garbage dumps
Hmm.
anymore? How will people operate? Right. And, I'm annoyed because the city's like, eh. And it's like, well, are you going to give me a refund for some of the taxes that you're not doing your job? No.
Mm.
Right. Yeah, of
Of
course
course not.
not.
No.
It's been 2 weeks. They keep screwing up because of the snow, and then they don't come around. But it's like, one thing goes wrong and then they can't even do it. And then it causes a feedback thing. I'm going to have piles of garbage now, unless I take it to the dump myself, which then costs money. And it's like, well, that's really silly. So much for this system. So what would I do? Well, in the past, they burn the garbage, but we can't do that because it has a negative effect on the environment. It's just like, what would people
Mm,
do? I don't even think most people would know. And it's like, that's why it's important, even if you don't say compost, to learn how to compost so that your organics can be solved on your own. Or obviously, if there's no supply chain, you're not going to have plastic. So then you have to learn how am I going to make my own clothes? How am I going to do that? You don't have to be an expert at it, but you should at least have base knowledge. A more relevant example, I think, to a lot of people is the amount of people I know my age who can barely cook, who couldn't even follow
mm.
a recipe. And it's like, what? Like, I know tons of people like that. They still can't. And it's just like that's an absurd thing.
I know. I know it's fascinating. I mean, I'm not a hero in the kitchen. I don't have ambition to be the best cook ever, but I can cook to survive, and I
Yeah.
have basic understanding, basic knowledge of that. I have basic sewing skills, so I know how to make clothing if I had to. It wouldn't look pretty, but it would fulfill the purpose.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's also when I see all those people talking about socialism and that they want to change it, and I understand why the idea of socialism is appealing. First of all, you don't have much decision making to do because the government does it for you.
Yeah.
Um, but on the other hand, and people also have this idea of humans being altruistic. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah.
Um, and but humans are not, as you said. It's easy to be like that when you're comfortable. You're at home sitting on the couch watching TV. It's easy to have all those ideas then, but as you said, what happens if anything goes wrong and nothing functions anymore as it should be? As you said, garbage is not being picked up, or supply chain is disrupted. I mean, there's a food shortage, whatever. Then altruism goes out the window pretty quickly, and then
Toilet
we're
paper
back to,
wars.
I know, right? And then we're
Yeah.
back to fighting tooth and nail for our own selfish survival, because that's what we are. We're still kind of animals. And I totally agree also with the fact that our bodies are not adapted to the society we're living in these days, at least Western countries.
Mm.
And that's why we also have, I think, so many mental health problems, because it's hard to cope sometimes.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the skills,
Or the social network, because like a lot of people just sit in
yeah.
their homes. Like the amount of people that well, I don't know. I know some people during the pandemic who didn't leave their house except for like groceries and were not
Mm,
interacting with people for like a year straight. And I'm just like, you didn't have like any friends you could know, or like I didn't want to. And then they clearly are just having complete catastrophic mental problems now
mm.
because solitary confinement is essentially a torture. It's considered a torture.
It's, yeah, and
It,
it's a reason for that. Yeah,
and
because it's
people
not
were,
healthy.
yeah, being told you have to stay by yourself or you're going to die, which was not true for a large percentage of people. And I was having conversations with people, and it's just like, you know, what you believe is not true. Like, you're going to be okay. Like, you can leave your house. And they're like, I just don't want to. I
Mm,
forgot there's a term. Someone was telling me about in Japan. There's a term for these people who just don't leave their house anymore, and they work from home. And but even before the pandemic, there were people who just don't
yeah,
never leave
no,
their house.
no, I know. I was watching a documentary about that. Yeah, they're totally shut-ins, and there is even I don't know what it is, a company or something. They provide them people. They have like social workers go out to them and try to lead them back into somehow kind of a normal life, or be their
Yeah,
friends, because don't have any social connection to the world.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a different culture over there, but it's just like the fact that they have a term for it there. Just people who don't
Yeah.
want to leave there. And it's not agoraphobic. It's just like agoraphobic being. I'm scared to leave. It's just these people don't know how to function outside of their apartment. Agoraphobic is someone who
Yeah.
knows how to, but is terrified. Something happened usually, and they're terrified to leave their home again. And it's just like that's kind of what happened with pandemic. We're getting people who are agoraphobic, or people who have just decided I don't like going out anymore. I prefer being at
Mm,
home because of the internet. I suspect two things. If the internet didn't exist, they would not have been able to lock down as much because everything would have
mm,
completely stopped. Companies would not exist. Um, but also, let's say they did do the kind of extreme lockdowns that they were doing. um, you would have seen suicides go through the roof. I mean, suicides did go through the roof, which governments don't want to talk about, but it's like you would have seen like a tenth of your population just kill themselves if like 2 years of this nonsense. I mean, I'm making a number up, but I think it would be
No, I
very
know.
high.
And I was looking up those numbers. I think last year at some point I was looking it up because I also, um, yeah, I also struggled being in solitary pretty much. I mean, I'm still very lucky. I have a job again. I'm financial stable, and but yeah, then in 2020,
I mean, you
my
had UTKM. You were helping me with
and I had
the Zoom
UTKM. We had the
classes.
Zoom
Yeah,
classes, which helped a lot. That was yeah, well, that was definitely good. Um, Other than that, I would have just gone crazy. And I'm very proud of myself that I didn't have to go back to mental health medication like
yeah.
antidepressants or anything.
Well, that's
That I
good.
was able to cope without.
Yeah,
Um, of course, adopting Rambo was also very important, as crazy as he is.
yeah,
But you know, he makes you get out of bed, and you have responsibility for him. And now again, my roommate moved back in, and I was just looking it up. The term that they use for those Japanese shut-ins is hiki hikikomori. I hope I pronounced it right. I
yeah,
apologize. Yeah, but yeah, they have a term for people
yeah.
like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
So it's a weird culture over there. It's like they're totally, even for an Asian culture, it's like one of the most like culture shocking culture. You know?
well, I mean, they're confined to their four main islands, so it's easy to develop a very specific culture and be like really standing out
Yeah,
in
and I
that
think
sense.
now like a third of their population lives in Tokyo. Tokyo is just one giant, massive, like 40
Holy,
million
yeah, that's
person city or
crazy. Well, that
something.
being said, I still want to go there one day.
Oh yeah, it's cool. It's totally. I went when I was younger, and I have not been able to go as an adult since. And it's a place
Yeah,
that it would be good to go to
and
again.
no, definitely. And I mean, also, it's the country of origin for judo. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of like I would like to go there, but right now with all those restriction, and then they found a new variant in France, the
Oh, I
IHU
just saw that.
variant.
I can't. I saw that like 20
Yeah,
minutes before we started, and I was just like, no, like Jesus Christ. Right?
and
it's
as
insane.
always, it's always this approach. We don't know much, but let's just start the panic already.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, we know damn
so I
well
don't.
what's gonna happen. It's gonna be getting less problematic and less problematic, but the good politicians are gonna keep freaking out and using bullshit. And then everyone, people said this was gonna happen like 2 years ago. That's and you know, and that's why I'm concerned. I've been talking to people about we need to not allow authoritarian governments. Stop it now, and I am
Mm.
very concerned for the state of humanity.
Well, what I was trying to explain to people in 2020 when Canada issued a state of emergency, and then they were able to push those new gun laws or bills through,
Or trying to,
and
yeah,
yeah, and yeah, trying to. And I mean, I said you can. Your stance regarding to guns can be what it is, but
yeah,
what if it is something next time it concerns you, and they
yeah,
just push it through without any democratic process, only
yeah.
because
Which
it's a
is
state of
somewhat
emergency.
kind of
We
what
can do
happened
whatever we
here,
want.
yeah. I mean, on the
Yeah.
gun thing,
Um,
they banned a whole bunch of guns for those who don't know, like 1,500 different models, and they did not go through a democratic process. It was unilaterally the prime minister and their cabinet, and it's still in the courts because
mm,
the prime minister has been stonewalling even the courts, which is like absurd. Like I don't know very many countries where a prime minister can basically metaphorically say "fuck you" to the courts. We don't have to do shit. You can't tell us what to do, and nothing happens. And that's somewhat. I mean, I'm cutting down the details obviously immensely, but that's kind of what's going on. You can't tell me what to do. I'm going to find a way to make this happen because that's what I want to do. And I don't really care what people think or say or anyone. And that's the attitude. And it's just like, ugh. And one day it will be something people care about. And then that's why it's always too
mm.
late. When you see the
Yeah, because
behavior,
nobody. Yeah,
it's like a school
and
shooter. Like everyone knows they're the crazy kid, and everyone says stuff, and then no one does anything, and then you're shocked that they came and did the thing they said they've been going to do for like the last 5 years. It's like it's the same concept. People don't like the comparison, but it's like
mm,
it. You see the behavior. The behavior is there. Oh, it doesn't affect you yet. Oh, and then you're dead. Like That's to sum it up how it works.
Yeah, and this is consistent throughout history. I mean, many countries started with taking slowly rights away, and then another
Yep.
one, and nobody cared because they always thought, well, doesn't concern me. It's always the other people.
Yeah.
And then once all the other people are gone and you're the only person left, nobody's there to help you.
Yeah. So I think we're coming up on almost 2 hours. I think we've kind of sussed out that subject a lot more. I mean, I've been very vocal and concerned this whole time, and you wanted to talk about it some more. Is there any final things you want to get in there before we wrap it up?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I always would like people to be more aware of their surrounding, no matter if it is related to self-defense, or just, your regular life. It's so easy to be rolled up in your own life and don't look left, right, and just, go have the tunnel vision. But we're living in a globalized community. So what happens in one country, there's a big chance it's going to affect us. So
Yeah.
I think I would like people be a little bit more informed, put in a little bit more effort. And I would also like to have a little bit more creative, or no, constructive, not creative, constructive discussions. Right now, very often you see that one side is talking to another side and they have opposing opinions. And for whatever reason, none of them is budging, not even trying to find a middle ground, and at least try to understand where the other person is coming from. You don't have to agree with them, that's fine. But I mean, at least try to understand, because opinions do not come out of nowhere. There is a reason why a person thinks a certain way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's pretty much. And for all those people who think socialism is a good idea, do a little bit more research.
Right.
Because I do not want to go back into that system. And that's what people, I think, forget. It's an economic system. There was a lot of stuff that we didn't have, or
Mm.
you had to be lucky to get your hands on it.
Mm.
And yes, toilet paper was one of those.
I got a bidet now,
And
just in case.
yeah. And and then also people always argue, yeah, but the Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Denmark, they're socialist.
They're
They're
moving
not.
away from it, heavily moving away from it because their
I think they
economy's wrecked.
were I think they were like socialist in the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
but then it really went south. So they decided that a
We're
lot of
not going to do
stuff
that
was getting privatized, and
anymore.
government was getting less control over things.
Yeah. Mm.
And they're paying pretty high taxes to afford all those social welfare constructs that they have, like all the kindergarten and all the schools are free and universities
Mm.
and stuff. So don't just follow what somebody's telling you. Try to take a step back and just do your own little bit of research. Don't believe everything you see or find or hear.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's
It's
pretty good
just,
advice.
yeah. But I know it's hard, and
Yeah.
yeah. But
Okay.
yeah,
Well, yeah.
I
Thanks
think
for
that's
coming
it.
on again. And
Yeah,
putting yourself out there is always a courageous thing that a lot of people have a hard time doing. So you should feel proud about
it
that.
is.
I wish more people would do
Yeah.
it. So thank you for coming on, and I will see you next time we have class.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
hopefully.
Okay. Have a good
Well, yeah,
evening.
thanks for having me. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Warriors Den podcast. If you like this podcast and our content, make sure you support us in the many various ways you can. The easy and free ways start with liking, subscribing, following, and leaving a positive review wherever you may be listening or watching.
You're listening to The Warriors Den. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga. Turning lambs into lions.